I was standing at the kitchen counter, looking at my phone, when I read the text from my daughter. "Mom, I already told everyone you're paying for the wedding. The venue's booked. We need a check by Friday." I read it twice, then I set the phone face down on the counter and finished my coffee. That was a Thursday morning in September. The leaves outside my window were just starting to turn, that early gold you get in Vermont before everything goes red and serious. I had nowhere to be. I was 63 years old, retired from 28 years of teaching 4th grade, and I was standing in my own kitchen in a house I had paid off 11 years ago, being told by my 41-year-old daughter that I owed her a wedding. I want to tell you this story from the beginning, because the text wasn't the beginning. Not even close. My daughter's name is Iris. She was the kind of child who made you feel chosen. She'd reach up for your hand in a parking lot even when she was old enough not to need to, and she'd tell you things, real things, the way some kids just don't. I raised her mostly alone after her father and I divorced when she was 9. We didn't have much. I clipped coupons through most of the 90s. I worked summers tutoring to pay for her school trips. I didn't do any of it, so she'd owe me. I did it because she was mine and I loved her, and that's what you do. She married the first time at 26 to a man named Phil. That marriage lasted 4 years and left her with nothing but a storage unit full of furniture and a very expensive lesson about trusting a man who says, "I'll handle the money, baby," every time a bill arrives. When it ended, I let her move back home. She stayed 14 months. I didn't charge rent. I didn't ask her to contribute to groceries. I just made space. She met her second husband. His name is Cody. At a work conference in 2019. He came in fast and certain, the way some men do when they've already decided. By Christmas, he was calling me Mom and helping himself to food from my refrigerator without asking. I want to be fair. He was not cruel. He was not loud. He was just the kind of man who assumes, in a very quiet way, that the world is arranged for his convenience. They moved in together in early 2020, right when everything shut down. Iris called me in April and said they were struggling. Cody's income had dropped. Her hours had been cut. Could they please come stay with me for a little while, just until things stabilized? I said yes. Of course I said yes. That was 4.5 years ago. Now, let me tell you what 4.5 years looked like. The first 6 months were fine. They were grateful. Iris cooked dinner twice a week. Cody fixed a gutter that had been loose since October. There was a rhythm to it that wasn't unpleasant. Then the rhythm changed. By the end of 2020, Cody had found new work, remote, good salary, better than before, actually. Iris went back to full hours. They started talking about buying a house, and I was glad. I started quietly looking forward to having my own space back, to eating cereal for dinner if I felt like it, to not hearing Cody's conference calls through the wall at 8 in the morning. But they didn't leave. The house hunting slowed, then stopped. Cody said the market was impossible. Iris said they wanted to save more. I didn't push. I told myself it was temporary. I kept telling myself that for another 2 years. What I didn't see, or maybe I saw and didn't want to name it, was that they'd stopped thinking of my house as a place they were staying. They'd started thinking of it as a place they lived. There's a difference, a big one. Cody started having packages delivered here. His gym equipment went into my garage. They repainted the guest room without asking me. Said they wanted it to feel more like home. Iris started referring to the kitchen as our kitchen in conversations with her friends. I heard her once on the phone describe the house to someone as our place in Vermont. I didn't say anything. I should have. In the summer of last year, Cody came to me with what he called a proposal. He sat down at my kitchen table. He never knocked, just came in from wherever he'd been, and he said he wanted to talk about the future of the property. He said the house was too big for one person, that it made financial sense for them to stay long-term, and that he'd looked into it and thought it would be smart for me to add Iris to the deed. Just Iris, he said. For estate planning purposes. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "I already have an estate plan, Cody." He smiled like I'd said something endearing. "I know, but this would simplify things, and honestly, if something happened to you, Iris would be protected." "She already is," I said. I have a will. He nodded slowly, like he was deciding how much to push. Then he said, a deed transfer is just cleaner. You could do it yourself. It's not complicated. I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it, but I did call my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia. I've known her for 12 years. She handled my mother's estate, and later, my own will when I updated it after the divorce. I told her about Cody's visit, and I told her some of the things I'd been noticing. The way they talked about the house, the way temporary had stretched into years, the packages, the gym equipment, the paint. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she said, I want you to come in. I went in that Friday. We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. Not because I thought my daughter was my enemy, but because I had spent 63 years taking care of things, and I knew what it looked like when someone was counting on me not to. Over the next few weeks, Patricia and I updated several things. My will was already clear, but we made it cleaner. And I took one other step, one I didn't tell Iris or Cody about. I placed the house into a revocable living trust. I remained the trustee. The house was still mine, completely in every legal sense. But the ownership structure was documented in a way that made any informal transfer very difficult to arrange. Then I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for exactly. I just knew I was ready. The text came on a Thursday in September. Mom, I already told everyone you're paying for the wedding. The venue's booked. We need a check by Friday. No lead up, no conversation. Just a statement of fact, or what Iris had decided was a fact. I picked the phone back up and typed, I didn't know there was a wedding yet. Call me when you have a minute. She didn't call. She texted back, we got engaged 2 weeks ago. I thought Dad told you. The venue only had this one date, and we had to take it or lose it. It's $14,000 for the space alone. I told them my mom was covering it. Please don't make this weird. I read that message 4 times, she thought. Her father had told me. Her father, whom I had not spoken to in 6 years. Her father, who had never once contributed to anything that required sustained effort. And somehow, in this version of events, I had already agreed to write a check for $14,000 for a venue I'd never heard of, for a wedding I hadn't been invited to discuss because she had decided to tell a stranger I was paying for it. I texted back one sentence, I need us to have a real conversation before I agree to anything. What came back was not a conversation. It was a wall of text. I'm not exaggerating when I say it took up the entire screen, about how I had always made everything difficult, how she had given up so much to be here with me these past years. I will let that one sit. How Cody's family wasn't able to contribute much, and she didn't want a small wedding, and didn't I want her to be happy. I put the phone in my purse and I went for a walk. I live at the edge of a small town. There's a road behind my house that goes up through old farmland, and in September it is genuinely one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen every single year for 22 years. I walked until my breathing slowed down. I thought about what I actually knew. I knew that my daughter had announced, to a venue, to presumably 30 or 40 people, that I was her financial plan. Without asking me, without telling me there was an engagement, without a single conversation. I knew that she and Cody had been living in my house for 4.5 years, rent-free, while both working and earning good salaries. Cody makes more than I ever did at the height of my career, and that in 4.5 years neither of them had offered to pay a utility bill, let alone contribute to the mortgage I no longer had but could have used the help with on other expenses. And I knew that the only time a serious financial conversation had happened was when Cody sat at my table and suggested I sign my house over to my daughter. I came home. I made dinner. I didn't respond to the text. At 9 o'clock that night, Iris came downstairs. They'd been up in their room all evening, which wasn't unusual, and she stood in the doorway of the living room and said, Mom, did you even read what I sent? I said, I did. And I said, sit down, sweetheart, let's actually talk. She sat. Cody did not appear, which told me he was listening from somewhere nearby. I said, tell me about the engagement. She softened a little then. She told me about it. Cody had proposed at a restaurant in Burlington. She'd been surprised. She'd cried. It had been lovely. I was genuinely glad to hear it. I told her so. Then I said, Why didn't you call me that night? She looked at the floor. I didn't know how you'd react. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, how did you think I'd react to my daughter telling me she got engaged? You and Cody haven't always. She stopped. Gotten along? I finished. He tries, Mom. I said, I know he does, and I want to talk about the wedding. I really do. But I need you to understand something first. I kept my voice level. I'd practiced this walk. I didn't agree to pay for a venue. I wasn't asked. I wasn't told there was an engagement until 2 weeks after it happened. And I found out about a $14,000 commitment with a 3-day deadline through a text message. Iris's jaw tightened. I knew you'd do this. Do what? Make it about money. I looked at her for a long moment. Iris, I taught school for 28 years. I raised you on a teacher's salary. I have never, in your entire life, made anything about money. But I'm also not a bank account that gets accessed without a conversation. She was quiet. I said, I want to help with your wedding. I mean that. But I need to know what I'm agreeing to, and I need to be asked. I'm asking now, she said, and her voice was small in a way that reminded me of her at 9 years old, after the divorce, when she was trying not to cry in front of me. I know, I said, and I'm listening now, so let's start over. What came out of that conversation was more complicated than I'd expected. It turned out the venue booking had not yet been fully confirmed. They'd put down a small hold, not the full amount. The I told everyone was more aspirational than literal. She'd told her closest friends and her father. The Friday deadline was real, but it was for the whole deposit, which was only $800, not $14,000. This is what happens when panic does the talking. We sat at my kitchen table until almost midnight. I learned things I hadn't known. That Iris was embarrassed she didn't have more savings, that she felt she'd failed somehow by still being here at 41, that she'd been afraid to come to me with the wedding because she thought I'd say no, and she didn't want to feel like a burden, and so instead, she'd just announced it as settled, because that felt easier than asking. I understood that. I didn't excuse it, but I understood it. Cody came downstairs around 11. He made himself tea, which was very Cody, and he sat at the end of the table and mostly listened. At one point, I looked at him and said, You knew about this plan. He said, She wanted to handle it. She's 41. I said, and she texted me like I was an ATM. That's not handling it. That's avoiding it. He didn't answer. I said, I want to ask you both something, and I want an honest answer. I paused. When you picture the next 5 years, where do you see yourselves living? Silence. Long enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum. Iris said, We've been looking at places. I know, I said. You've been looking at places for 3 years. Another silence. Cody said, The market has been. I know what the market has been, I said. I wasn't unkind, but I was clear. I love having you here, and it also can't be permanent. I need you to understand that. Not because I don't love you, but because this is my house, and I made certain decisions about it that I need you to know about. Iris looked up. What decisions? I told her about the trust. I watched her face as I explained it. Not in a complicated way, just plainly. I had placed the house in a trust. It belonged to me, as it always had, but it was structured so that it would pass, eventually to her, but through a specific process that protected everyone, including her. No informal transfers. No shortcuts. When did you do that? She asked. A few months ago. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, Because of Cody. Because of a conversation Cody had with me, I said, which I should probably have brought back to you directly. Cody looked at the table. He knew which conversation I meant. I said, I'm not angry. I want to say that clearly. I'm not telling you this to punish anyone. I'm telling you because you're my daughter, and I think we need to stop having conversations around the edges of the real ones. What happened after that was slow, the way real things usually are. The venue deposit was paid. I covered it as a gift, with the explicit understanding that the rest of the wedding budget would be a collaborative conversation, not a unilateral announcement. We set a number I was comfortable with. It was less than $14,000 for the venue alone. Iris found a different space, a converted barn outside of town, for 40% less, that she ended up loving more anyway. She and Cody started actually looking at houses. Not browsing, looking. putting in offers. 3 months later, they found a place in a town 20 minutes away. It needed work, but it was theirs. They moved out on a gray Saturday in January. I helped carry boxes. Cody shook my hand at the end of the day in a way that felt genuinely like a fresh start. I stood in my house that night, and I didn't know what to do with the quiet at first. It had been 4.5 years. I walked from room to room. I stood in what had been their room, and I looked at it without the gym equipment and the furniture they'd taken, and I thought, this is mine again. It was a very good feeling. The wedding was last May. A Saturday, warm, that good Vermont spring light that makes everything look like it was planned by someone who loves you. Iris wore a dress she'd found at a consignment shop and altered herself, which was so like her, so stubborn and resourceful and clever, that I teared up when I saw her before anyone else did, in the parking lot, fixing her own veil in the side mirror of her car. She looked at me and said, "Don't you start." I said, "I'm not starting anything." She reached over and fixed my hair, which the wind had wrecked, and she said, "Thank you, Mom." For all of it, I didn't ask her to specify. Some things you just hold. I sat in the front row, and I watched my daughter get married for the second time, and I thought about the Thursday morning in September when I'd read that text and set the phone face down and finished my coffee. I thought about the choice I'd made not to react, not to match her panic with mine, not to either hand over the check or blow everything up. I thought about Patricia's office and the trust documents and the quiet work of protecting something you love before anyone tries to take it from you. The thing no one tells you about setting a boundary is that it isn't a wall. It's a door with you holding the handle. You decide who gets through and when and under what terms. You can still let people in. You're just the one doing the letting. My daughter is happy. She texts me almost every day. Normal texts about small things, a funny thing that happened, a recipe question, a picture of something she saw that made her think of me. Last week, she sent me a photo of a climbing hydrangea at their new house and said she'd planted it because I have one and wanted something of mine in their yard. I have it saved. I look at it sometimes. That's what I kept. That's what the whole thing was for.